All right, I'm going to get us started. Welcome to our webinar titled Filling the Gap, CalFresh Eligibility Among University of California and California Community College Students. We have a really great turnout. We're excited that you're here. This is a really important topic. We'll have the Q&A box open for questions. We'll do our best to answer them as we go, and we'll also compile questions to discuss at the end. So feel free to submit questions that way. And the webinar is being recorded and will be shared afterwards. So we're very excited to have Senator Nancy Skinner on today to give a brief introduction. As most of you already know, Senator Skinner has long been a champion of CalFresh and safety net programs and making these programs more accessible for college students. So please welcome Senator Skinner.
Thanks so much. Very pleased to be here and to be part of the webinar. And Policy Lab, I'm very impressed with your work, and I'm glad you've been looking at this particular topic of CalFresh for our college students. California has a high cost of living, and few of our campuses offer all the student housing that is needed. So many students are, they can't get student housing. They're trying to compete with other people in the market for housing. So you've got students living in their cars, or you've got students who are basically using every bit of money they have for rent. And the result is then they're hungry. So our hunger rate amongst college students is 10% higher than the national average. Amongst our kids that are in K through 12 schools, we've addressed that by providing universal school meals. So we've now basically every kid at a public school in California, K through 12, is offered 2 free school meals a day. But that's a harder thing to do at our colleges. So instead we use CalFresh. And when I was in the assembly, so back in 2014, I authored AB 1930 because the rules around CalFresh were such that you could not qualify as a student. You could not get those food benefits. And so we established a college hunger working group to fully examine the issue and to look at how we can change that and how we can change the rules and make sure that students who are low income, who many college students are, to be able to get access to CalFresh. So then in SB 641, I, in effect, took the recommendations, which was a bill I did in 2022. I took the recommendations from that working group and we put them into law, and that removed many of the application barriers. But as the Policy Labs report has shown, still we have many students who qualify for CalFresh, but who are not applying. So we establishing the basic needs centers at our UC campuses and at the California Community Colleges campuses helps, because those basic needs centers can help give students the easy access to getting their CalFresh benefits that they deserve. And the take-up rate is increased. It's increased substantially since 2017, but it's still not to the level that we want, which is, of course, partly the purpose of this webinar, to figure out, okay, how do we get it up to the level we want? And so I'm really pleased that you're all doing this, and I'll wrap it up there. And of course, it's up to you whether you want me to add anything or.
Great, thank you so much, Senator Skinner. Now we're going to turn it over to Andrea Brayboy, who's the CalFresh and Nutrition Branch Chief at the California Department of Social Services.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Senator Skinner, for that introduction. Increasing student access in CalFresh remains a top priority for the department here at the California Department of Social Services. And of course, since that is one of our top initiatives, it was only right that in 2020 we collaborated with the higher ed segments, the California Student Aid Commission, as well as the California Policy Lab, to develop a methodology to use the available administrative data to measure the number of college students who are eligible for CalFresh. So what are our perspective on the results? We believe that the research illuminates the progress made to date on enrolling college students in CalFresh. It also underscores the opportunities that we have to increase enrollment and where to target our efforts using a data-driven approach by continuing what works and partnering with our higher education partners and county partners to use data to support their innovative approaches to increasing enrollment. We see significant increases in enrollment amongst the UC undergraduate population, and that is successes for our outreach efforts, including referral partnerships with CSAC, outreach partnerships with the UC, and development of a student eligibility screener and dedicated landing page on the getcalfresh.org website. This also has worked in tandem with the student eligibility work group that Senator Skinner just lifted up. So the research also highlights how take-up differs by various student exemptions in 2019. And since 2019, CDSS has partnered with the higher education segments and CSAC to determine exemptions to the federal student eligibility rule and expanded the number of academic programs which may be considered an exemption to that rule, thereby increasing access on a larger scale. Through thorough exploration of policies around student exemptions, the work group was able to expand the local programs that increase employability exemption from fewer than 900 programs to over 11,000 programs since the expansion implementation of 2022, with additions to the list of approved programs made each month. While we've come a long way, we acknowledge that there is much more work to be done, and we're committed to making data-driven decisions and using these insights to inform our next steps in terms of outreach and collaboration with our higher ed partners so that we can serve all Californians during this time and to make sure that we eradicate food insecurity in our state. And with that, I'll turn it back over to CPL. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, we're excited to be joined by Dr. Jeannie Kim, Director of Student Mental Health and Wellbeing at the University of California.
Thanks, Joanna. Hi, everyone. Jeannie Kim, she, her pronouns. I serve as a system-wide director for student mental health and well-being for the University of California Office of the President. And I am so pleased that we have partnered with the California Policy Lab in their work to evaluate CalFresh benefits and how our students are enrolling in those public benefits. I share sentiments with Senator Skinner as well as Andrea in that this important work is critical for us in better understanding the incredible work that's happened across the state over the many years that we have had, partnering with our higher ed coalition and our partners. Within the University of California, we define basic needs as the minimum resources necessary to holistically support all of our students in their daily lives. And we believe that access to CalFresh benefits is essential to that critical need. We also, affirm that having basic needs is more of an ecosystem of financial stability by ensuring equitable access to nutritious and sufficient food, as well as safe, secure, and adequate housing, and then access to healthcare to promote and sustain mental and physical well-being for our students. It's really critical that our students have access to affordable transportation and resources for their personal hygiene and emergency needs for their dependent students. And we know that our students aren't what you typically think of, as your traditional quote unquote college student that's attending higher ed these days, right? We know that many of our students come with an intersection of identities and can benefit from these basic needs services in order for them to succeed and thrive within the higher ed setting. So I'll just close with saying how appreciative we are of the California Policy Lab and our partnership with the California Department of Social Services, CSAC, as well as our other higher ed partners in this work and this endeavor to continue to evaluate and support this critical work, because this is definitely still just the beginning, as we've talked about many, many years in wanting to ensure that our students have their basic needs met. So thank you.
Great, thank you so much. So thank you to our partners for coming onto the webinar and sharing your thoughts. And we're also grateful to the California Student Aid Commission and the California Community College Chancellor's Office for their partnership in this work. And now we're excited to jump into the research and really talk about what we found. So I'll turn it over to Jesse.
Great, thank you. And as we're getting the slides started, let me remind people we have the Q&A tool open, so please feel free to jump in and ask any questions. We'll have some Q&A time at the end. Next slide. So this project has been a big team endeavor. We've had, in addition to the kind of 4 agencies, which I'll talk about in a minute, we've had a big team of researchers and staffers working on the project. You can see a number of them here. There are some others who have moved on to other roles since the project began. It's been several years in the making. This is a project we did through the California Policy Lab, which is a research center at the University of California, housed at Berkeley and at UCLA, whose goal is to generate research insights for government impact. We develop hands-on partnerships with government agencies, where we work with those agencies to develop and co-create research agendas where we use administrative data to help answer questions that are important to improve programs and policies for Californians. Next slide. So the motivation for this project is to understand the relationship again between CalFresh and college student enrollment. Increasingly, students need support beyond financial aid to meet their basic needs when they're in college. CalFresh, which in other parts of the country is known as SNAP, or used to be known as food stamps, is a program that can provide money to buy groceries. It can be very helpful for students who otherwise might not have enough money to feed themselves, and that can make it hard for them to continue in college. But the CalFresh program is complicated. It's not really designed primarily for college students. And so I think there's been ongoing concern that there may be a large number of students who are eligible for the program but don't know about it or don't receive benefits. We haven't really had great information even on how many students were participating, let alone how many were eligible and not participating. And so this project has been a kind of innovative effort, a collaboration between the Policy Lab and 4 government agencies that we've used to generate the first ever estimates of college student eligibility based on administrative data. So let me talk a bit more about that. We've partnered, as was mentioned earlier, with the California Student Aid Commission, with the California Department of Social Services, with the University of California Office of the President, and with the California Community College Chancellor's Office to create the first ever linkage of individual level data from those 4 sources. We've created a database linking together enrollment records from the 2 higher education segments, participation in CalFresh from the Department of Social Services, and financial aid information from the Student Aid Commission. These are all linked together in a privacy-preserving way where their personally identifiable information is never shared, but it allows us to understand which students are participating in the program and to come up with estimates of how many students are eligible even if they aren't participating. Next slide. So the process of qualifying for CalFresh benefits is complicated in the best of times, and for students it's even more complicated. The program is designed for people who have low incomes and can't afford to buy groceries. It's limited to citizens or permanent residents, but there are extra rules for students that may mean that somebody who is otherwise eligible under the normal rules, if they're a half-time student, may not be eligible. For students, they need to meet an extra exemption in order to qualify. And so we've conceptualized the eligibility process as basically a 5-decision process that we've tried to map out eligibility. I want to emphasize at this point that we are not the official determinants of eligibility. The way you get on CalFresh is you apply for benefits and you're evaluated by a county welfare program office that administers it. But we are not them. Many of the students who we're interested in have never applied for CalFresh, and so they've never been through that process. What we're trying to do is come up with an estimate of if they applied, would they become eligible? And so I want to talk about in the next slide how we go about that. So we think of there as being 4 primary decisions. There was a 5th one on the previous slide, but it's less important. 4 primary decisions that we have to make in order to decide whether a student's eligible. One is whether they're a citizen or permanent resident. That's in the segment data. Another is whether they're income eligible. That depends on the size of their household and on the income of their household. Where the household for CalFresh purposes is defined somewhat differently than it is for anybody else, any other program. It's defined based on who you prepare food with. So we'll talk more about that in a minute. For the time being, we'll just say that we know a lot about the family structure and family income from the FAFSAs, the free application for federal student aid. We have student status from that depends on your age and whether you're enrolled more than half time. We have enrollment from the segments, and we have age from the FAFSA. And then the last piece is exemptions. As I mentioned, even if students meet the income eligibility criteria, they still need to have an exemption in order to qualify. And that'll show up on the next slide. So this is a partial list of the exemptions. If you're receiving a TANF funded Cal grant, if you're working 80 or more hours a month, if you're receiving CalWorks, if you have work study, if you're a parent with childcare needs, there's a long list of detailed exemptions that can allow students to qualify. But if you don't have one, you don't qualify. We're able to approximate most of those using data from the segments and from the FAFSA. The one that we do a particularly poor job of approximating is how much somebody works. We don't have information on people's off-campus work, and so we miss some exemptions. But we think we do a pretty good job of capturing most students with exemptions. Next slide. Okay, so now we're going to move into talking about what share of students we think are eligible. So this shows the share of undergraduates at the University of California and the share of students at the community colleges who we think are eligible in every term, fall and spring, from 2012 to 2021. You can see that at the community colleges, it's been pretty stable at around 16% through this period. Of 16% of all students at the community colleges are eligible. That rose up during the pandemic when the rules were loosened somewhat. And then at UC, it's been also stable at around 30 to 35%, although you can see that there's a pretty strong sawtooth pattern at the UC. That reflects one of the exemptions, which is if you're in your last term of enrollment, you have an exemption. UC students are much more consistent than community college students, so their last term is almost always a spring term. And so that means a lot of UC students become eligible in the spring, where in the community college, it's more evenly spread out between spring and fall. We'll talk in a few minutes about why it is that the eligibility rate is so much higher at the UC than it is at the colleges, which was a surprise to us when we did this project. Next slide. Okay, I want to emphasize the importance of these exemptions, which was the big focus of our work here. Among students who are income eligible, who meet all the criteria, but not necessarily have exemptions, only about 40% of students at each segment have the exemptions. And which exemptions they have differs across the segments. The EOPS category, which captures a number of special programs at the different segments, that is large in both of them. But at UC, about a quarter of students have Cal grants. And Cal grants for UC students count as exemptions because they're funded with TANF dollars. The Cal grants for community college students are smaller and aren't funded with TANF dollars, so they don't qualify them for exemptions. So that will become important. Next slide. So I mentioned I was going to come back to this question about why eligibility is so much higher among UC students than among community college students. Turns out that there are two reasons for that. The first is one that we didn't appreciate till we got into this. Remember, CalFresh eligibility is based on who you prepare food with, and thus who you live with. We presume that the people you live with are who you prepare food with for most students. Community college students are much more likely to live with their parents than UC students are. That means that especially if they're under 21, the parents' income counts towards the household's eligibility determination. Whereas the UC student, even if their family has the same income, the UC student is much more likely to be living away from home, often in an off-campus apartment, and then the parents' income doesn't count towards the eligibility determination. So even though community college students on average come from lower income families than UC students, the fact that so many UC students are living on their own and that therefore their parents' income isn't counted towards the determination raises the eligibility rate of UC students above community college students. The other important factor, not quite as important as housing, but also important, is that community college students are less likely to have exemptions, where the big mover here is, as I mentioned, the Cal grant. The flavor of Cal grants that's available to community college students doesn't qualify as an exemption, and so therefore they're much less likely to have exemptions. And that accounts for, again, about a third of the gap between UC and community college students. And with that, I will turn it back over to talk about take-up rates.
Great, thank you, Jesse. So in addition to understanding how many college students are eligible for CalFresh, we wanted to know how many of those students are actually participating and receiving benefits. And we found that fewer than 1 in 3 eligible students are receiving CalFresh. So looking first at the orange line, which represents UC undergraduates, we see that very few eligible students were participating in 2012, but around 2017, take-up started to increase to about 25% in our latest data. And this uptick corresponds to a concerted effort by the UC system to increase outreach about CalFresh around that time. Among community college students, which is represented here by the blue line, we see that take-up has declined slightly from 37% in 2012 to 27% in spring 2022. Across both segments, what this means is that students are leaving money on the table. And that 235,000 low-income students could be getting help to pay for food during school, but are not. And if even half of those additional students signed up, that would mean approximately $140 million in federal funds coming into the state each year, additional funds. So we also found that take-up rates vary by campus and by region. So looking across UC campuses, we see UC Santa Barbara's take-up rate stands out, followed by UC Davis. We've heard both Santa Barbara and Yolo counties, which is where Davis is located, have been especially effective at smoothing the CalFresh application process for college students in collaboration with those college basic needs offices. We also observe variation in CalFresh take-up across community college regions. So for example, the Central Valley has above average take-up, while the Bay Area is on the lower end. In the report, we provide breakdowns by student characteristics, including race and ethnicity, financial aid status, age group, and others. And on this slide, we present take-up and eligibility by race and ethnicity. So a few takeaways from this table. First, we see that CalFresh take-up among eligible students is lower for Asian American, Asian, and Pacific Islander students across both segments, and is also low for American Indian, Alaska Native, and white students at the UCs. In particular, take-up is 0% among American Indian and Alaska Native students at the UCs. This is rounded down from a fraction of a percent, but it certainly jumps out. We also observe that Black students in both segments are successfully accessing the benefits they're eligible for. The same is true for Hispanic, Latino, Chicano students at UC, but not at community colleges. So those are our high-level findings. For those of you who want more details, for example, on which exemptions are most common, or more subgroup analysis, we encourage you to look at the report. Our hope for this research is that it'll really help build on the momentum in California that Senator Skinner spoke to earlier and our partners. There's been a lot of work in recent years through advocacy, legislation, and on the ground to connect more students experiencing food insecurity to CalFresh, which, as our partners highlighted, can be a lifeline in this expensive state. Specifically, we hope these findings help organizations conducting outreach target that outreach at likely eligible groups of students to close the take-up gap. In addition, we think these findings point to some policy opportunities. So for example, is there a way to ensure food insecure students aren't excluded from access to benefits because they chose to live at home to save on housing costs? Are there more opportunities to extend exemptions to more low-income students, such as extending the Cal Grant exemption to community college students? We know that many of you have been working hard to get your campus programs to count as exemptions, as local programs to increase employability. But is there more on the policy front that could be done to remove these extra hurdles that college students face? So at CPL, we have our own next steps after this report, which include number one here, updating these estimates as we get more years of data, and adding CSU, which we're very excited about. We're also planning to answer the following questions. Number two here on this slide, what amount of CalFresh benefits, so how much money do participating college students receive each month? Do students retain access to CalFresh across transitions? So for example, high school to college or after a transfer. How does CalFresh participation impact educational and financial outcomes? How does the LPIE expansion affect CalFresh participation? And finally, we want to know and we want to measure what's working. How are different outreach strategies impacting CalFresh participation? Finally, I want to emphasize that we're here to be a resource. So if you're interested in testing the efficacy of your outreach or application assistance efforts, or if you have other ideas for how this linked data set could be useful, don't hesitate to reach out. And I'll put my email address in the chat. With that, I'll hand it back over to Joanna to lead our Q&A.
Great, thank you. So I see a number of questions have been coming in through the Q&A. So I will pose some of them back to Jen and Jesse think through. So one question is, was the student meal plan status included in the eligibility determination?
Yeah, so that's a good question. One of the rules is that if you're on a meal plan that provides more than half of your meals, that you're not eligible. We don't have data on who's on student meal plans. We experimented with different proxies for that. There are relatively few students in the community colleges who are on meal plans. There are somewhat more at UC, but even at UC, most students are not on meal plans providing more than half their meals. We couldn't come up with a proxy for it that we thought was reliable enough to use. So for the moment, we're not excluding students on meal plans. That may lead us to slightly overstate eligibility at UC, but we think it's not an enormous factor.
Great. And someone else asks, of the students who are eligible for but not taking up CalFresh, are they eligible and perhaps not aware that they're eligible?
We think that's very likely. We don't know for sure. We don't know which students have applied, but we think it's quite likely that a large share of the students who are eligible and not participating are not aware of that. And we saw that there's a big increase in take up at the UC in the last few years. We think that is likely attributable to substantially increased outreach at UC and assistance for students to help them learn about the program and apply. And that suggests that there is room there were a lot of students who previously didn't know about it, and now more of them know about it, but I suspect there are still lots of students who don't.
Great. And another question is, do we know what the average CalFresh grant is, the grant amount is for students that are on the program?
And do you want to take this? Or?
Sure. So we're currently working on that. We don't have final estimates for that, but from what we're seeing so far, it's substantial, at least the average amount. It varies depending on what your income is. So it can be as low as $30 a month and as high as, 240 approximately. And we're finding that the average amount is something in the middle there, which is, substantial for a college student's monthly budget.
Great. Here's a question asking, to your knowledge, have any basic needs centers at the universities, I'm assuming, explored partnering with social services to have workers on site to auto-qualify students? This is done in some agencies who serve unsheltered youth. Do you want to take that, Jesse, or?
Sure. I'm not aware of any basic needs centers that are auto-qualifying students. I know that that at many campuses, there has been a lot of work between the university basic needs center and the county to try to smooth the process. But I don't know, and that can take the form of, for example, working out the nature of the letter that students get to notify them they're work study eligible, to make sure that that letter will work as evidence of that for the CalFresh application. But I'm not aware of any place that's gone all the way to auto qualification. While I have the microphone, I'm going to answer one other question that came in the chat. Just somebody said they're not sure they understand what TANF funded Cal grants are. From a student perspective, a Cal grant is a Cal grant that they don't need to know. But it turns out that behind the scenes, some of the Cal grants are funded with money that comes through the TANF program, which is the federal funding stream that funds a number of welfare programs. And that is relevant because if you're a beneficiary of TANF benefits, that counts as an exemption for a CalFresh. So the students who get those Cal grants that are funded with TANF dollars qualify. The Cal grants A and B that many UC students get fall into that category, but the versions that community college students get do not.
Great. These are great questions that are coming in, so keep them coming. But another one is, have you looked at procedural denials and how that impacts students? So, and I interpreted this to mean, students who are actually applying for CalFresh and are getting denied.
So we have not studied information on students who apply. We haven't, the data we have doesn't have information on whether people have applied. All we know is whether they are accepted. We are working with CDSS to kind of extend this project to be able to look at applications and denials, but we don't have any information about that yet.
Great. And there was a question about connecting with the K-12 system as students move into college. Jen, do you want to say a word about what we're doing in that area?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So concurrently, we're working on a project that is looking at kind of what the trends are in the transition from K-12 to college. So less on the programmatic side, but more, just what do we see in terms of students who are participating in CalFresh in high school? Do they continue to participate when they move to post-secondary? So that is an ongoing project, and the results should be out soon, but some kind of preliminary findings are that oftentimes the majority of students that we're seeing who are participating in CalFresh in post-secondary were also connected to the program in high school. So we think there could be different implications for, in terms of outreach for students who already were connected to CalFresh in high school versus those who are not.
Great. And there's another question clarifying how we determine the take-up rate, and curious about our insights on the major reasons of non-participation among students. Do you want to take
Sorry,
that?
can you repeat that?
Sure. How do you determine the take-up rate? And curious about your insights on the major reasons for non-participation among eligible students.
Yeah. So the take-up rate we calculate as we identify all the students who we think are eligible, and then we figure out which of them are actually receiving benefits. And so the take-up rate is the number of eligible participating students divided by the number of eligible students.
Great. And then there was a question about what kinds of interventions do you think will be most effective in increasing the CalFresh take-up rate? And if given the opportunity, what would we test first?
That's a great question. I can start and then Jesse, feel free to chime in. So far, we've conducted a few experiments testing the efficacy of different types of email and postcard outreach. What we've found is that multiple rounds of outreach, so multiple emails, makes a difference in getting students' attention and signing up for CalFresh, as does an email paired with a postcard. We also have kind of tested different types of messaging to see what's most effective, and that research is also available on our website. I think we're definitely open to different ideas on different types of outreach that is happening and that we could test. So we are relying on our network and all of you to come to us with ideas if there's something you're doing or have heard of that's particularly effective. We've heard a lot that the relationship between counties and campuses is really important in making that experience more seamless for college students. So I think that's one thing we're interested in exploring.
I think that's right. I think in general, we're interested in any and all outreach efforts that we can evaluate. But I think the information interventions, just telling students about the program is helpful. I think the more personalized and individualized the information can be, the better. So I think, for example, that one thing that colleges could explore is they know about many of the exemptions that students might have. And the information about exemptions is not as sensitive and protected under federal law as information about financial aid. And so, for example, you could imagine any student who's enrolled in a program that qualifies them for an exemption could get a letter saying, this program qualifies as an exemption. The only criteria left that you would need to qualify for CalFresh are to meet the income rules. Here's what they are. You probably know whether you qualify for that. If you do, here's how you apply. And I think that could be helpful. Even more helpful, I think, would be kind of integrating the process into the financial aid process so that students could, in one stop, both deal with financial aid questions and do a CalFresh application, ideally all in the same room. I think that is likely to be more effective. But again, we think that these data give us a new, unique opportunity to measure the effectiveness of outreach efforts that we've had to just guess at in the past. And so we're really excited about using that to help do more kind of process improvement around this outreach.
Great. Thank you all for those great questions. We're happy to follow up with anyone who has questions that didn't get answered during the webinar. So please email Jen, and I'll put her email address up in a minute. But I just wanted to take a pause and introduce Dr. Valerie Lundy-Wagner, who's Vice Chancellor for Digital Innovation and Infrastructure at the California Community College Chancellor's Office, to say a few words.
Yes, thank you, Joanna, for still letting me speak. And I've been happy to join the webinar for whatever reason with my sort of login problem. That said, I think you and your team know, and I hope everyone else knows, I think the Chancellor's Office is ecstatic to partner with Cal Policy Lab, with CDSS, with CSAC, our colleagues over at UC, and certainly welcome the addition of data that you all have with the CSU soon-ish. In doing this analysis, the declining take-up rate for community college students and just the gap in eligibility really speak to I think the nerd in me that wants to answer research questions and do nudging, et cetera. But I think the sort of larger policy question or issue that we're really grappling with is sort of how to think about, manage, understand these exemptions and the role they play, this issue of like housing and meal plans, and the extent to which those are present or not present at community colleges, especially, for example, given that more community colleges are building housing, for example, right? How is this going to really impact what we're doing? And I think to some extent, many of these big policy questions like beg this larger statewide conversation about like how effective we think financial aid can be in propelling and helping students maintain momentum to get to completion, right? And then how do we sort of best package that to like optimize or maximize at all three of the segments? Because I think, you know, completions at all three levels matters. And the fact that there are low income students obtaining access to higher ed is fabulous in all cases. And I think we all hopefully are trying to embrace the idea that we don't need to have an oppression Olympics, right? Who is having the poorest students and having them sort of demonstrate poverty, but that there is a space to better understand, especially for California community colleges, where we know there are very low income people, that they are sharing housing in other places, like with other people, means, you know, perhaps the nerdy part of me and for you all is doing projections. If we were to eliminate that exemption or this issue of housing, how would that change? How could that be more similar to the UC or CSU? What would it mean if more colleges were able to provide sort of a meal plan type option, again, projecting, again, so that we can have some of those really great strategic conversations in our segment, but again, across segments. So I'm super excited about this, both the nerdy parts and the policy parts, and hopefully you all will continue to be up for the challenge.
Great, thank you so much. So we want to thank everyone for attending the webinar. We're going to link to our report again in the chat, and it's on our website, and we'll make this recording available on the CPL YouTube channel. We will also be sending out a survey after we close. We know there is a lot of great work happening in this area of student connection to basic needs support. I've been seeing in the chat people mentioning things that they're doing. We'd really like to help amplify your work. We'd also love your input on how you think these data that we have compiled over many years and a lot of effort could be useful to you, both to learn about the efficacy of what you're doing, or just to give, you know, basic stats about what's going on in your area. So definitely let us know through that survey. So once again, thank you so much for joining us. And we hope to be in touch.